sound is off, Chrissy.
Yeah, and I just, yes, so we are going to record. So you'll see that come up on your screen. Just go ahead and press the button that it tells you to, whatever it tells you to do. If you don't want your image to show, whomever is talking the most, your image will be on there. But if you don't, you can stop your video and that will, your image will go away. We're going to go ahead and mute ourselves during all the presentations just for background noise, dogs, phones, whatever. We'll send out an email afterwards with a survey and some feedback of our program tonight and a link to our past Zoom presentations. So you can check those out too. So thank you for being here.
Great. All right. Thanks, Chrissy. Well, I want to introduce Ed, who you already all know, but Ed's a retired journalist who grew up in Sunnyside, and he worked for various newspapers before returning to the Yakima Valley and working for the Yakima Herald. He also taught at the college, and we particularly appreciate him because he's been a great contributor to our network, helping with the newsletter, tech tips, organizing some of you all to do poetry readings for us several more other times, maybe three or four. But most importantly tonight, he's the president of the Yakima Coffeehouse Poets and has been involved with the Coffeehouse Poet Group for more than 27 years. And that's really amazing. So we're really glad you're here, Ed, and we're looking forward to hearing more, both from you and from others. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mary Lou. And the Yakima or the Yakima Seal and Neighbors Network, is near and dear to us. You guys have been one of our favorite audiences, as we have read poetry to your group, and of which I am a member, by the way, several times. I don't know that we've done it since the pandemic hit. I'm not sure. I can't remember if we did one on Zoom or not. But I know before that we did. Did we do one? Okay. Before that, I think we had about at least two good readings. Yeah. And anyway, it's always been really a lot of fun. Anyway, Linda Brown, of course, she's been with this outfit for as long as I have, so she can also at some point, if she wants, speak up if I leave something out or forget something. Maybe she can back me up. And any of the other poets that are listening right now, if you guys want to at any time add something to what I'm saying, feel free to do that. Basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically, give you an overview of how the Yakima Coffeehouse Poets came about. We've been around for going into our 27th year, which is, suddenly, as I realize that's a long time. I don't know that anybody thought that far ahead, when we first started. But anyway, I've got this kind of written down. It really did help me to write it down because Linda, a few years ago, did a history of the organization up to that time. I think I was in about 2013 or 14. And so that was helpful. But since then, that's really the only recorded history that we've got. So we're, you think I'd know better being a journalist that, you need to get stuff down on paper, otherwise, you're going to forget it, or I'm going to get hit by a car while I'm out walking or something, and then it's gone, right? So you'd think I know better. So anyway, so this was kind of a nice incentive to start the process of maybe doing a better job of writing down, how we came about, and maybe some of the adventures we've had along the way. So I'm going to kind of read this and kind of bear with me, and then we're going to follow up, I think, with a Q&A for a few minutes, and then we'll kind of segue into reading some poetry. So that's kind of the format, right, Mary Lou? Okay. Okay. The Yakima Coffeehouse Poets has had two beginnings. First and most important was its original conception in the fertile brain of Elizabeth Harris Miller, the one-time executive director of the now defunct Allied Arts of the Yakima Valley. which used to be headquartered in a now razed former fruit warehouse at Gilbert Park in West Yakima. That was in 1994. At that time, Allied Arts was a nonprofit that served mostly visual artists. Elizabeth wanted to broaden the mission to include a literary component. She felt that a nonprofit like Allied Arts needed to include creative writers in the Valley, not just visual artists. And poetry seemed like the literary genre that could best be served with the public event space that Allied Arts had to offer. Growing its mission would also extend the vital fundraising arm of the nonprofit to reach a larger segment of the community. How best to do that? Elizabeth needed to find someone with connections in the poetry community, which in those days was pretty small and mainly revolved around Jim Bodine and Blue Begonia Press and a small cadre of English teachers at Davis High School, all of whom were enthusiastic about poetry. They were also very busy with their jobs. And she knew me. At that time, I was on hiatus from my newspaper career to pursue a master's degree in poetry at Central Washington University. She contacted me. Would I have time to talk about a poetry event at Allied Arts? It was the fall of 1994. And I remember we met for lunch at that restaurant where the shopkeeper furniture store is now. I can't remember what that restaurant is called, but they used to be really have good food there. There, Elizabeth presented me with her idea. As I recall, she knew she wanted some sort of public event that would attract a crowd. Basically, she wanted to get bodies in her building and broaden her base of patrons. We ended that lunch with tentative plans for a poetry contest that would culminate with a public reading at Allied Arts where the winners would read their poems. We would also have music and have a winery on hand to serve and pour wine. In other words, it would be a party. Elizabeth wanted to know, could I organize such an event? My answer was yes, I was willing to try, but I needed help. I knew Jim Bodine and Linda Brown and some of the other English teachers at Davis. I was also a friend of the late Paul Anderson, who wrote both fiction and poetry. Plus, I had contacts at the Yakima Herald-Republic, so I knew I could get the word out through the newspaper. Long story short, we organized that first contest, mainly Linda and Paul and me, with support and help, of course, from the staff at Allied Arts. And the first juried poetry reading in Coffee House, that was what we called it, was held on the evening of March 15th, 1995. Linda, Paul, and myself were the judges for that first contest, and I was master of ceremonies for the reading event. I should add that Inkling's Bookshop has been a generous supporter from the get-go. And I want to show you the first chapbook that we have, and this may be the only one in existence. None of us have been able to find another one, but this is it right here. This is what the first, it's a very simple affair. I think basically it was run off on a copy machine up at Allied Arts. But yeah, it was pretty simple. That event was the first of many. This April 21st will mark the 27th year the contest has been held. 18 years under the auspices of Allied Arts and 9 under the leadership of the Yakima Coffeehouse Poets, which leads me to explain our second beginning. Most of us recall the sad demise of Allied Arts. Under the leadership of Elizabeth Miller and her assistant Jessica Moskwa, Allied Arts had thrived. Then Elizabeth retired, and Jessica, after several years, eventually moved on. An abrupt decline in leadership led to financial problems. Then the aging warehouse was condemned as unsafe. These unfortunate developments led to bankruptcy and the dissolution of Allied Arts in late fall 2013. This, of course, was a revolting development for the arts community as a whole, and certainly sent a thrill of panic through the local poetry community. We had lost our venue and parent organization. So what do? We quickly gathered to brainstorm. These meetings were organized by Dan Peters, who teaches English at YBC. The initial focus of those meetings was the greater writing community, including prose writers. Out of this, however, emerged a smaller group of poets, mainly those people who had been involved in the poetry events at Allied Arts. By this time, it was no longer just a contest. No, the menu of events had expanded to include a monthly open mic night, as well as occasional workshops conducted by well-known regional poets. Instrumental in organizing some of these events were Elaine Smith, Linda Brown, and Cindy Lamb. As I said, a smaller group of poets had emerged from the larger group that was meeting at the college. I believe there were 7 of us: myself, Linda, Elaine Smith, Don Burke, Cindy Lamb, Mark Fusey, and Linda Peer. We met at my house several times during the winter of 2014. Out of those meetings emerged the Yakima Coffeehouse Poets. We incorporated through the state as a 501c4 nonprofit, and that remains our status today. The annual contest looked and felt a little different that spring of 2014. That was mainly because we didn't have the usual venue. We also didn't have time to properly market the contest, nor did we have time to process and judge the entries. Instead, we decided to compile an anthology of poetry, which would include at least 1 poem each from the hundreds of winners who had participated in the contest during the previous 18 years. And this is what the book looked like. It's pretty thick. It's got almost 200, well, it's got over 200 pages in it. So, and I've still got copies of this anthology. As a matter of fact, I have quite a few. So anybody wants one, I can cut you a good deal. Okay, so we held that first Yakima Coffeehouse Poets event at the Seasons Performance Hall. Since then, we have held our events at several venues: the Seasons, the Old Unitarian Church, and most recently, the Larson Gallery at YBC. The pandemic, of course, has changed how we present our events. The last live event we had was open mic night on Wednesday, March 11th, 2020. You will recall the lockdown became effective on March 15th. Since then, Zoom has been the hero of the day, enabling us to continue our events successfully online. Is it as good as live poetry? No, but it does allow more people to attend because they don't have to travel to Yakima. Thanks to Zoom, we have continued to get good turnouts for both the annual contest event, reading event, and our monthly open mic nights. The good news is that the Yakima Coffeehouse Poets continues to be a viable organization. It was born out of the rubble of Allied Arts and has flourished in the face of a pandemic. Not only has it survived, but we continue to attract poets and poetry lovers from throughout what I call, as I explained before, Eastern Cascadia, that area along the eastern slopes of the Cascades between Canada and Oregon. We have also added to our services the Labyrinth Poetry Series, which represents the work of new poets who have never published a chapbook, became a Yakima Coffeehouse Poets project with the blessings of Labyrinth founder Elaine Smith, who also serves on our board. There have been many people who have been important to our success. I've mentioned a few, but there are others. Wendy Warren, the late Tom Peer, the late Dr. Loxie Allen, Jane Gooding, and Terry Martin, and the list kind of goes on. There's a lot of people who have been involved over the years. And I just wanted to show you what our latest, okay, this is 26. This is last year's poetry contest chapbook. And it's a very handsome, I mean, it's really evolved over the years into a really, and it's, this is a pretty fat book, it's got 50 pages in it, and, a bunch of poets from, kind of throughout that region that I mentioned. And then this is our latest Labyrinth. chapbook by Leon Petty. Just came out. And these books are available. Oh, they're available at Inklings for one thing. And some of the other Labyrinth books, maybe Linda Brown might even have some books up there. At any rate, if you check the poetry section at Inklings, you can find some works by local writers there, and including some of our people. So okay, that kind of brings it up to our present day. And okay, Linda's got to ask something she wants to add. Of course she does. Yes.
I always interrupt, Ed. Pick that book, the green book, back up again and show the cover. And that is Lynn Stover's quilt that she made. Hold it still. It is absolutely stunningly beautiful.
I had nothing to do with, was not an influence in picking that. I want to quickly add that. Go ahead.
Beautiful.
And Lynn is watching right now. I think you should thank her for the cover. It's beautiful.
Thank you, Lynn.
Okay, let's see. Mary Lucia, did anybody have questions, I guess? Little question and answer session here before we get into some poetry.
Yeah, if people have questions and some of you in the group want to add something, please do. And you'll have to unmute yourself.
Ed, when did you start open mic? When did you start having those?
Okay, well, Linda might have to help me out on this.
They go all the way back to when we were at the warehouse in the Allied Arts building, and they were hilarious. We had so many. My favorite are remembering the weirdos that were there. Cindy and I would bring cookies, and Ed would bring coffee, and we would just turn it loose, and we never knew what was going to happen, and we're always entertained. There was one guy who always came with his Bible, and he claimed that he was just reading the poetry of the Bible. We had to finally get a stick to pull him off the stage, and decide, made a new rule saying you could not do any religious work. And there was another guy who wanted to talk about his sexual conquests, and he memorized, Rod, you'll be interested in this, he memorized all of his poems and performed them ad nauseum. It was hilarious. It was fun because you never knew who was going to show up.
Yeah. I should add on our open mic nights. The open mic nights are always interesting, as most of you people, some of you have attended those, and you know that. But basically, they're open, and we have minimal rules in place. And actually we let that guy that read from the Bible go for quite a while before we kind of told him, look, nobody's really enjoying this, So we're pretty tolerant about, remember one time we had an open mic night up at this is at Allied Arts, and there were a couple of young women from Toppenish showed up, and that was the first time they came, and that was the last time they came. But both of those girls, they got up there and they read poetry that was extremely graphic, sexual. Right down to describing all of the sex organs and so forth. And they knew exactly what they were doing. And the audience had a number of older people in it. And I have to hand it to the audience. Nobody. There were some grit, there were some sort of tight-lipped people, but nobody said a word. We didn't get any criticism. And that was the last time those girls ever showed up, So occasionally we'll get a sort of outlier like that, but for the most part, the people that are reading are doing it for all the right reasons, So yeah.
Ed, I have a favorite memory of one of the Larson Gallery open mics where there was a young woman and her husband was in a wheelchair and he was holding a baby. Some of you probably remember this.
Yeah.
And she pushed him up and they did a poem together in tribute of Kobe Bryant. That was pretty amazing. You know, so I mean, the fact that it's so open means some pretty amazing things can happen. They might have been off
Yeah,
color
well,
sometimes, but really touching. That was amazing
yeah,
night.
that's the fun part of open mic night, because you really do, you get moments of honesty and clarity, and we've had a number of occasions where people, we have one guy, Polo, who his English is a little, a little shaky, but he writes beautiful poetry. I mean, just passionate poetry, And occasionally he'll have this young woman along with him, and she will read he will write the English version of the poem, but it's a little hard for the listener to understand it sometimes. So she'll read that version of it, and then he'll read the Spanish version of it. So you get both sides, so that's really neat when that happens.
And we have, Ed, you might point out that once a month, the last Thursday of the month, we publish one outstanding poem, and this man, Polo Munoz, has had, I think, at least one or two of his poems published.
Yeah, we have, we've gotten this a kind of a really, and I'm probably most of you have seen it, but on Thursdays, the last Thursday of each month, in the scene section of the Yakima Herald-Republic, they have a column featuring a Yakima Coffeehouse Poets writer. And that's what Linda's talking about. And we have one of our board members, right now it's Margaret France, will find a poet, and we're always trying to find, new faces. And she'll find a poet in our area, in our coverage area, and we'll feature that poem. And the Herald-Republic does a great job of displaying that on the scene section. So, yeah.
I have to tell you a little bit about my experience with your poetry group. And it was when we met at the Summit View Country.
Mhm.
And I will crawl on my knees to somewhere where someone is going to instruct me on improving my golf putting. But I was not very enthused about going to hear people read poetry. It just, simply because I have a science background, and I just don't get a lot of it. But I'll have to tell you, I think it was one of Claire's poems, and I absolutely wept. I thought, this is the most beautiful thing. I mean, it was like getting introduced to opera or ballet or something. And it just realized that I needed poetry in my life, and that it really was a wonderful experience. So.
Thank you for that, Barb. Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think that
Yep.
one problem with people our age,
Mhm.
or maybe even any age these days, we kind of grew up in a time when the poetry that we learned about were the classics, mostly 19th century poetry,
Mhm.
which wasn't really very fun to read if you were a high school kid or somebody
No.
who just started college. It was difficult.
Mhm.
Because the language was kind of old fashioned and hard
And
to,
stilted. Yeah.
and some of it was quite obscure. It was really hard to understand.
Mhm.
Well, that has evolved a lot over the last 40, 50 years, to where
Yeah.
now the poetry scene, particularly open mic type stuff, where the poetry is much more accessible, much
Mhm.
more, the language is not so convoluted, not so formal, as they call
Mhm.
it.
Yeah. No, I agree.
More conversational, so.
Yeah. And the issues are pertinent to our lives.
Yes. And
I just want to
I
say,
want-
Barb, that might have been one of the nicest things anybody's ever said to me, by the way. So thank you.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
very welcome. I was very moved by, I think it was just you living your life with your kids. It was
Yeah,
just
I remember
wonderful.
that poem too. It's really well
Yeah.
received. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that very often provides the most meaningful material to a poet, is just writing about trying to understand the life that's going on around you and the good things about it or the disturbing things about it or whatever.
Mhm. Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I
Well-
want to tag on to what Barb's been saying about this and saying that by coming each month to the Yakima Poets, I don't know every single person there, but you know, it's not that, Yakima's not that big a place and it's kind of interconnected. And sometimes somebody shows up and reads a poem that I know from really like, you know, a daughter of a something or other. And by hearing the poem and then knowing just that little bit of biographical information about the person, it's so much more meaningful than if a group of strangers were reading. There was, you know, when Terry Martin read one of her poems, I had been at Ohana with her one time. And so like what she read nearly knocked me over. It was just so powerful. And I think that's one of the advantages of a local group.
mm-hmm. No, well said, Kathy. Thank you. No, I think
And sorry, I have to run. I'm so sorry, but
that's okay,
I'd like-
Barb.
Sure.
I'll
Thank-
catch up for Mary Lou. Bye. Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Okay, bye.
I move that we
Bye.
move to poetry.
You missed the good part.
I suggest that we start poetry.
Yeah, go for
What's
Me?
that?
it. Talk to Ed. Ed's in charge.
Oh, well, okay.
The poetry begin.
What, should we get into the poetry? Is that what?
Sure.
Okay, all right, we can do that. We can talk more later if people have questions about, you know, the process. Okay, who would like to start? Basically what I thought we'd do was just each of us, of the poets present here, read a couple of poems and move on. Okay, so Claire, go ahead. Yep.
Okay, so I have 3 poems about winter, and some of them have some common themes. And winter comes. The last tomatoes, green picked before the frost, have ripened and been eaten. We've gathered autumn's bounty of walnuts and winter squash. In the barn, the goats grow fuzzy against the cold and round-sided with next year's kids. I've put away the milking bucket for the season. On morning runs, not even a hint of dawn, and I race the darkness on the long ride home. With the trees bare, I've settled some. Winter has a subtle beauty, but I can imagine a gray day with a cold wind when my restless soul might be content to doze a little by the fire. For fall, with its fleeting intensity, has faded, and winter comes. A running start on winter. In the morning, not even the faintest hint of dawn. My feet find their way by starlight or instinct when I leave the warm den of bed to run, getting a running start on winter. The grayness of gray days, the goats dry, the garden frozen, these could sink into my soul until I am as gray as ashes. So I race from task to task. It's hard to hit a moving target. If I move fast enough or long enough, perhaps the grayness of gray days won't sink too deep. I've been attempting a running start on winter. But the goats are dry because they're incubating new life, kids to be born in the bouncing enthusiasm of spring. And even in the frozen garden, garlic bulbs sleep, only pausing in their efforts to push their green lives towards the sky. In this fallow time, what could I nurture if I slowed down enough to notice that even grayness has a beauty, if only to be muted contrast to the joyful greens of spring. And last, in defiance of winter, the little hen sat in a corner of the barn through all the dark days of January. Feathers fluffed against the cold, she kept the faith that life could grow despite the darkness. With the warmth of her body and her will to wait, she fought the forces of winter and found it was enough. 2 yellow chicks hatched from 2 brown eggs to take shelter under her canopy of feathers. Like her, I want my work rewarded by the peep of new life. I want to thrust my body between the lives I cherish and the darkness. Want my canopy of feathers to be a haven against the cold. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you, Claire. Okay, who would like to go next?
I can.
Chuck? Okay, go for it.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
You can hear me? Okay.
Yep. Yep.
I'll start with shucking out back. In autumn, I collect and shuck walnuts. Unfailingly, the ripened husks whisk me to the Great Lakes town of my youth. Wechters or Conger's Woods, Giles's Creek, the old A-frame clapboard, at the curb, smoky piles of moldering leaves. And Dad, from whom I inherited my walnut lust. To the woods, toting bushel baskets, mellowed by familiar and handsome landscape, easy banter, lamenting the perennially pathetic Indians, not Ohio's indigenous, but rather the baseball Indians of Cleveland, sudden Sam McDowell, Rocky Colavito. Nighttime, my brothers in the garage, gloved hands reddened from shucking the stubborn bastards, paused to set alight the garbage barrel. But what's this? Remove the tissue, unroll the stiff stained cotton pad, stare in disbelief. What the? Is someone sick? Where did that come from? We avert our gaze, too embarrassed by ignorance to keep eye contact, rendered mute by the magnitude of what we do not know. That probably doesn't need any explanation, but as a kid, that was shocking. In any case, this one's called In the Muck. The muck, dark expanse of flat, fertile northern Ohio, thousands of spongy acres of lettuce, celery, radishes, my adolescent summer workplace. On cool June mornings, fingers ached, dew-wetted, stiff with chill. Later, the dog days, black dirt parched our throats, lined our sweat-slicked skin. Spanish-speaking families lived in broken gray shacks, lining rutted farm roads. Everyone older than 9 climbing aboard the morning work trucks. Poor white migrants, too, from West Virginia and Kentucky. Cletus, Clinus, Delbert, raw, strong, poorly educated ruffians. At break, poker or mumbly peg, cigarettes, scuffles. Early on, one of the older boys one morning suggested I ask yonder sweet ginger from Kentucky if I could see her snatch. Even lacking familiarity with that word as a noun, any fool could guess the meaning and outcome of such ill-advised speech. Not I. A combustible admixture of restless, impatient naivete, I approached, cleared my throat, lobbed the question. As open palm, loudly jacked, fleshy face, heads turned, to witness glasses airborne, witless dumbass stumbling backwards. And then I'll do one last one. This is fairly self-explanatory also. I recently retired from work as a physician, and this has to do a little bit with that. Wonders never cease. And the names are not, they have been changed, so no one will be identified here. Wonders never cease. Antonia and Humildad, older first-generation immigrants, their first pregnancy. Attentive, soft-spoken, In these last weeks, I feel their eager and penetrating gaze, warm spotlights on my face, searching, trusting my eyes more than my words. The unspoken question, it will all be regular and normal, won't it? But of course, I do not know. Then unwelcome and unbidden recollection of another, whose baby for 6 agonizing minutes after delivery of the head had an unmovable shoulder wedged behind her mother's pubic bone. Judging the wholeness of a fetus by ultrasound is like searching for summer constellations through the haze of wildfire smoke. I offer reassuring words. After all, the odds are greatly in their favor. Should I tell them about impacted shoulders, worrisome infections, compressed cords? A week passes. In the exam room, Antonia anxiously shifting from foot to foot, like a boxer before a match she expects to lose. Formerly radiant smile, now tight-lipped grimace. I've had pains every 3 minutes for hours. Humildad took me up there, but they sent me home. This script all too familiar, so eager with the first, a quick exam, it's not yet time. Mother deflates in disappointment like a thirsty seedling in parched soil. I return with the nurse to examine Antonia's body with gloved hand, tips of 2 fingers like eyes on stalks reading her flesh and bones. A woman's first labor. How did our ancestors do this? 10, 15, 18 unrelenting hours, no IV narcotic, no epidural, pain, 2-minute rest, pain, rest, pain, 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 exhaustion. Good Lord, make it stop. I examine Antonia. Did I just feel? Yes, hair, molded bones, almost no cervix. Go now. With astonishment, I regard this woman now smiling, who has at home, alone with Humildad, endured in the past 10 hours more pain than I've suffered in 10 years. As the woman who birthed me said, and I would be wise to remember, wonders never cease. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck. Okay, let's see. What do we have? We have Chuck and Rod and me. Is that, or are there some others? You want to go, Linda?
I'm gonna just do a couple. I've only won once in all those years of being part of poetry. So this is from the 24th edition. And I write a lot of poems, or I wrote a lot of poems about being a teacher and about my students. This one is called Letter of Recommendation. To whom it may concern, I am writing on behalf of Aaron, who gave birth to himself, filled his lungs to bursting and became a resolute wind. He named what should have been but wasn't, found an exacting bed, disguised himself with moon and stars. He ran the labyrinth of school, dreamed of roses in winter, dared question and forgave feeble answers. When those twin snakes, bureaucracy and indifference, obstructed his way, he fashioned truths out of anger and ink. He built a sturdy house, furnished it with hope, built his own church, and discovered you were no God. What becomes of birds born with no wings? For a while he was wingless, then wove wings for himself out of yes. You gave him dry grass. Beware the fire. And that kid did really well in life. He works at the Children's Hospital in Seattle. Amazing. And the one that people seem to like was this one poem called Melanie. Um, it speaks for itself. One girl sits in the back of the room trying to disappear, but becoming more visible each day. She stares out the window as though a storm is coming, but the storm is inside and she cannot escape torrential rains or the winds that swirl within. Melanie doesn't speak with her mouth. She uses a sign language of her own. Sometimes she makes signs on her arms with number 2 pencils, drawing small circles like escape holes. Lately, she's been sketching with a nail file, cutting into the flesh on her arm, making small hieroglyphs that no one can read. They say, "Do something, help me before I slip away beyond reach." But no one knows how to read the signs. No one can find Melanie, even though, like Hansel and Gretel, she leaves a trail to follow, small drops of red rain leading deep into the forest.
Wow.
And this one that you've never heard before. I loved this kid. This speaks a lot about what we do wrong with our children. The boy who lives in 2 oceans. It's strange to live in 2 places and still not have a home, like swimming in cold waters when you're a warm water fish. Daniel lives with his mom 1 month, his dad the next. Between the storms, he searches for tranquil waters. At school, he sits alone and eats alone and dreams alone. He's a dolphin living in captivity, divided between 2 different pods. It's not easy. Each breath may have to last through the night. Daniel has learned a few tricks to please the crowd, but what he really wants is to swim away. Okay, that's good. Thanks.
See, Rod, you want to go?
Sure, I'll go. First I'd like to say, I missed the first 20 years of Coffeehouse Poets, and it was really good to hear the history tonight. And the organization has meant a lot to me, and I'm very grateful to all the work that Ed and Linda and all the others have done to maintain this. It's been just wonderful for me. My first poem tonight is a little over 40 years in the making. It kind of describes sort of a spiritual journey. It's called Seems Like Searching, Definitely Not a Proclamation. 200 years after Galileo was put under permanent house arrest for suggesting that the calculations of Copernicus were correct, the Earth revolved around the sun and not vice versa, David Hume found the fatal fallacy in the last best argument, the divine watchmaker argument. 100 years later, still, Darwin discovered a different origin of the species, and Friedrich Nietzsche reluctantly wrote the obituary. But it was nearly another 100 years before Time magazine published the question, is God dead? Not just the old white dude in Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel mural, but the entire concept. A short survey, a brief dictionary. Thank God, an expression of deep gratitude, relief. Oh my God, surprise, disbelief. God bless, an expression of love, frequently misused. God damn you, an expression of hate. The face of God, awe. God forsaken, desolation, despair. God's creation, everything. The hand of God, an explanation for a fortuitous event. God's plan suggests hidden purposes to the events of the world. God works in mysterious ways, an expression that accepts the arbitrariness, the unfairness of the universe with the blind hope that it all works out in the end. A walk with God, a spiritual journey, or to be kept safe. Love of God, a universal all-encompassing love, or a blasphemy, especially if preceded by the preposition for. Wrath of God, punishment, usually deserved. One of God's creatures, an imperfect being, yet still beloved. God save us, a plea of last resort. God sent a welcome and unexpected help. God's will, the inevitable fate. Oh God, oh God, oh God. Words of appreciation for a pleasant experience. God, speakers use it, writers employ it, we all exploit it. He seems everywhere, or she, Pachamama, Mother Earth, Alanis Morissette in Dogma. Though they may be the best pronoun, especially if you're inclined to pantheism, the divinity in all things. Although my left brain warns, there is no divinity in the hurricane's howl, the creep of cancer. And aside, this is not about morality. Plato, Mill, Kant, the American John Rawls all gave us ethics without the supernatural. Even JC's maxim, love your brother as yourself, stands quite nicely, thank you, without God. So has God become just an adjective masquerading as a noun, a handy multi-purpose metaphor? You tell me, but the failure of the teleological argument, the illogic of a morally perfect omnipotent being existing alongside floods and earthquakes, does not change a primal desire for a decider in the universe, a permanent designated driver, a karma-like force to set things straight, bring malfeasance to justice, a reason the seasons come and go, the fat buffalo appear to feed us. Mothers see God's breath in their baby's first smile. Children feel God's love in their mother's lipstick kiss. Lost souls, and we are all lost souls at some point, feel God's comfort in a hand on their shoulder. For those of us without the discipline of the bodhisattvas of the world, meditating ourselves into acceptance that we are just a drop of water, soon to return to the sea, an improbable God still provides a soothing shorthand answer to that unanswerable big gulp question that scares us to our genetic core. Where do we go from here? Swing low, sweet chariot, swing low. My second poem is a prose poem. I grew up in a small town in the valley. You can guess, it's called A Hometown Story. Malzberger and I, we called each other by our last names in our hometown, worked in orchards on the opposite sides of town one summer. The last summer, I would not be a returning stranger. And in the early morning on the way to work, we passed each other headed in opposite directions on a narrow asphalt county road. Me in my VW, Malzberger in his Jeep. And as casually as that, we each came into the oncoming lane, and with a wave or a flip of the bird, we went by the other on the wrong side of the road at about 50 miles an hour. No problem. I'd known him since we were 3 or 4, the adopted boy in a rare single child family with one blue eye and one hazel eye, who at age 10 just said he always needed to be outside, who could eat a grasshopper. I know, I saw it. The legs were still kicking when he popped it in. You knew all these things when you grew up in the same small town, just like we all knew that the only Black family left town after a cross was burned on their lawn and someone tried to burn their house down. And with that, most racist talk ended in that little town, though the bullying kept right on. Me being dragged naked from the pool dressing room onto the cement deck, my pre-pubertal body exposed to the bright summer sun, the lifeguards powerless to stop it. Malzberger being taunted when his drunken high school girlfriend pulled a train, crying openly in homeroom, the embarrassed teacher ignoring it, and not a word of worry for the 16-year-old girl. But none of that was ever talked about and is not talked about now when I meet him for a beer and a shot at the tavern on Main Street that's been there since before we were kids, and revert to the comfortable grammar of my youth. If it don't snow a foot on Sunday, I'm headed out to Clemens chucker hunting. Want to go? And look into the weathered, familiar face of the 4-year-old, the 10-year-old, the 17-year-old boy with different colored eyes, who I've known for as long as I can remember. The two of us still just headed in opposite directions. No big deal. It's just the way it is. Malzberger never married. He's been too busy chasing his boyhood dream, working as a logger and hunting and fishing the rest of the time. And I'm still trying to be, pretending to be, the toughest guy in the room. Thomas Wolfe wrote, "You can't go home again." But Bon Jovi sang, "Who says you can't go home again?" I think you just never really leave. Malzberger and me, I left town. He didn't. Not sure it made much difference. We both left heartaches there. I don't know if that little town toughened us up or beat us down. It's our hometown. There's just no perspective. Thanks for listening to my poetry tonight.
Great, Rod. Fantastic. Okay. You see, the subject of a lot of these poems you're listening to are like everyday stuff, right? So, you know, and we're all capable of doing that, even those people that are listening who have never written a poem before. So all you have to do is just start putting stuff down on paper and kind of go from there. Let's see, I guess I'm the last poet. Did I leave it? I think there's nobody else.
Does everyone realize that Rod was reciting those from memory?
Yeah. Pretty remarkable.
Amazing. Very powerful.
Yeah. Okay, I've got a couple of poems here I'll read. These are recent new poems. And I'll start with hauling wheat. I was 16 that summer and driving wheat truck in the Bickleton Hills for Leonard. I had just seen Johnny Tremaine at the Starlight Drive-In and had a crush on Priscilla. I would lie in my bed in Leonard's basement and fantasize about Priscilla, while Leonard was upstairs in his own bed banging his unhappy second wife. I know she was unhappy because Ed Cooch told me so on one of my long drives hauling wheat to the granary at Alderdale down on the Columbia River. Ed was Leonard's hired hand, a smelly old sheep herder with knots on his head who rode shotgun and told dirty jokes on how much he hated rattlesnakes. He'd watch for snakes on the winding dirt road and whoop when he saw one. I would stop and Ed would grab a shovel from the box in back, cuss the snake and chop its head off. Ed said Leonard's second wife was like those snakes, but Leonard was too love-bit to know it. Mostly I drive alone. It was 18 miles each way in a beat-up dump truck on a bumpy, hilly dirt road, and the brakes would overheat and I would have to stop and refill the cylinders. And once I had no fluid and drove the whole way without brakes. Strange how they come back all these years later. Ed, Leonard, Leonard's wife, the winding dirt road, the past unwinding scene after scene, coiling, hissing, ready to strike. Thank you. And let's see, maybe have I got time for two more? Okay, I'll tell you what, I'm going to read this one first. Some of you may have seen this ad. This was an ad that was in the Yakima Herald Republic, a full page ad on both sides on, I believe, Thanksgiving Day morning. And I think it's pretty self-explanatory. The poem, or the title of the poem, is Black Friday at the Gun Range. It's the morning after Thanksgiving and business is brisk at the gun range. where the locals are lining up for the Bring a Buddy Glock giveaway. The doors open at 9. Bring a pal or 3 and you'll be entered to win a pair of consecutive serial number Glock 19 Gen 5 pistols, plus a pair of limited edition Glock 35th anniversary watches. That's what the full page ad in this morning's paper says. And that's not all. Bring a buddy and you get a second entry if either person makes a purchase. And the deals don't stop there. Sign up for a membership and get in an hour early for a 10% discount on any new regularly priced firearm. Only $299 for a brand new Smith & Wesson SD9VE 9mm 16 RD. Only $499 for a brand new Ruger PC carbine 16.1 inch 9mm 17 RD. Only $599 for a brand new Smith & Wesson M&P 15 optic ready 16 inch 5.56 NATO and NATO 30 RD. Only $449 for a brand new Smith & Wesson M&P 9 Shield with a 3.125 inch 9mm 13 RD. But wait, there's more. We have gift baskets available for every gun enthusiast on your list. Buy a basket of bullets for a loved one. And there's 20% off for stocking stuffers. Surprise your kid with a gift certificate to take a class in concealed carry firearm training. It's enough to bring tears to your eyes. Any of you see that ad?
Oh my gosh.
See, sometimes you can just find a poem in the paper, you just pick up the paper and there it is right there. Okay, this is my last one. This is called Clean Sheets. He was having one of those no good, very bad days. It was not an unfamiliar feeling. He recognized it from his boyhood. Angry days when he would pin live crickets to the wall of the garage and watch them squirm. But he was old now. You'd think he'd be over that. But there were days, something in the air, an uncertainty that made him doubt his own worth as a human being. Not angry like when he was a boy. There were reasons for that, those tired old wars between his parents. That was old news. This was different, more like a sadness. Some days he would wake up and feel outside his own skin. Those days he would go for long walks in his neighborhood. He would pass other old folks. They all seemed to share that same 1,000-yard gaze, like they were looking down the barrel of a gun that was loaded and ready to fire. True, it was winter, so maybe it was the weather. What did they call it? Seasonal affective disorder? Sad. What the hell? He was sad. But it wasn't that kind of sad. No, it was more mysterious than that. Odd as it seemed, he kind of liked the feeling. It was like feeling sorry for yourself, the sweet self-pity that comes when you can't do what you want to do. When he felt that way, he would embrace the mundane, do simple things, mindless things, working in the yard, digging in the garden, yes, walking in the neighborhood. Eventually the mood would pass, the sadness lift like morning fog. That's what he was doing now. The laundry, stripping the bed, washing the soiled sheets, triumphantly carrying the load down to his basement laundry room where he measured out detergent, carefully poured it into the dispenser and pressed the button to start the cycle. As he went through each step, he felt himself being taken somewhere. He remembered his mother, how she would load up the noisy old wringer washer and how he would tag along, helping to carry the loaded basket outside where she would hang each wrung out article on the line. He held that memory as he washed his own sheets. And when they were dry, he and his mother carried them upstairs. And with each step, he felt the sadness lift, leaving in its place the smell of sheets, sweet, clean sheets.
Great.
Okay. I want to mention one thing here before we close. We do have the 20, and this is for, if any of you are inspired by what you're hearing today, to actually write some poetry, we have our contest. And we've just kind of launched it, you know, the call to poets to enter submissions. And we have the submission guidelines right here. And what I'm going to do after I'm done here is I'm going to send a copy of the submission guidelines to Chrissy and Mary Lou, and maybe they can circulate those guidelines, you know, amongst the other members of the Neighbors Network. And maybe, you know, maybe you'll be moved to, you know, enter the contest and maybe actually even win a prize. But it'd be fun just to try, right? And anyway, and you can also find the guidelines on our website, which is the Yakima Coffeehouse Poets.com. And they're all there too, so you can find it there. But I'll send this to Chrissy and Mary Lou, and they can circulate it. And then I want to end with one thing, and this is, and I think this will be meaningful for this audience because we are of a certain age. And this is by the poet Stanley Kunitz, and some of you may have heard of him. He lived to be almost 101 years old. And this is what he said in his 100th year. This is what he said. This is Stanley Kunitz. When you look back on a lifetime and think of what has been given to the world by your presence, your fugitive presence, inevitably you think of your art, whatever it may be, as the gift you have made to the world in acknowledgement of the gift you have been given, which is the life itself. And I think the world tends to forget that this is the ultimate significance of the body of work each artist produces. That work is not an expression of the desire for praise or recognition or prizes, but the deepest manifestation of your gratitude for the gift of life. And I want to read a poem by Stanley Kunitz, which kind of echoes that. And it's called The Round. Light splashed this morning on the shell pink anemones swaying on their tall stems. Down blue spiked veronica, light flowed in rivulets over the humps of the honeybees. This morning I saw light kiss the silk of the roses in their second flowering. My late bloomers flushed with their brandy. A curious gladness shook me. So I have shut the doors of my house. So I have trudged downstairs to my cell. So I am sitting in semi-dark, hunched over my desk, with nothing for a view to tempt me but a bloated compost heap, steamy old stink pile under my window. And I pick up my notebook and I start to read aloud. I start to read aloud the still wet words I scribbled on the blotted page. Light splashed. I can scarcely wait till tomorrow when a new life begins for me, as it does each day, as it does each day. Thank you very much for letting us read some poetry to you tonight.
Thank you for being here.
All the poets who came, fantastic.
It's great.
Thanks for including us on your regular, you've got some converts from inviting us to your regular open mic nights. It's been really fun.
Great.
So sincere thanks to all of you. This has been a wonderful evening. And the only thing I want to do is tell people that next month in 2022 on January 19th, we've got Joe Miles coming. He's the historian. He's been working in the archives at the Yakima Valley Museum, and he's going to talk about his book on Chief Kamiakin's conflicts between warriors and soldiers in early Washington territory. So we're looking forward to that. And we hope you'll join us, any of you who wish to. Open to anybody who wants to come. So thanks everybody so much for coming tonight. And again, thanks to every poet who read. We really appreciate your time. And this has been an intimate and wonderful evening. Thanks. Great.
Happy holidays. Feliz
Yeah.
Navidad.
That's
All right. Good
Good
evening.
night, everybody.
Good
Good
everybody.
night.
Thanks.
Thank
Ed.
you. Thank you.
Yeah.
right.
Sweet dreams. Nice to see you, Lynn.